Okay, so I want to try videotaping this to see if I can work out all my kinks before I send it to my Bible study group. And it's funny how every single time I'm always in the same spot. And this is always the place where my bunny rabbits make a ton of noise. So when you hear all the noise in the background, it's them trying to bury and dig and rip apart cardboard boxes. And sometimes the dogs start barking and stuff like that. And it's always before I get myself ready in the morning, because this is when I find the stillness of the day and the quiet so that I can hear from God. And so I'm going to try recording this and seeing what happens. Okay, so I've been reading Joseph in Genesis, and I didn't get very far, and I had a lot of things that just came into my heart, and I wanted to write it down before I forget. One of the nice things about having time off is you have more time to spend with God. Now, I'll tell you that I spend a lot of time just wasting it, playing games and just not doing what I should be doing. But sometimes I become disciplined, and I'm like, hey, since I have the time, I should spend it in God's word. And I'm very glad I did. Now, whatever's going on, whatever's happening in your life, I'm sure that you have at times thought, it's just not fair. And how you respond to the unfairness. I think my hardest part with dealing with something that's happened to me, when I can't see that I had a legit thing to cause this amount of punishment. You know, sometimes I'm like, yeah, I did something wrong, no problem. But then other times when I can't find fault, or I really can't find the blame, it's harder for me to accept what's going on. And I think that if I stop fighting, that means I agree with what's happening. And that simply isn't the case. It just means you're not fighting anymore. And sometimes you have to accept what's happened. You don't have to agree with it, but you have to accept it and move on. And I think Joseph does that here. Okay, so I just have 3 little verses. Okay, so Genesis 39:20. And Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. As the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. Okay. So, honestly, it's probably 2 of the 4 verses that really hit me today. And it's funny how one verse, one word can change your whole life, or it can change how you look at things. Okay, so here's what I have in my notes. So Joseph probably was trying to figure out what God was doing in his life and what God wanted him to do. Did he remember the visions that he had had as a young man? How could that happen when he was a slave? So his life looked so far away from those visions that he had had as a young man. I wonder if he started to question whether they were really from God. I've done that. My life is so far from this actually happening. There's no way that this could happen. Yeah, you can't make it happen. It really isn't about you and what you do. Watch and see what God get the glory. I've had God tell me that many times as I have searched for guidance, and I really wanted to do something that would make life more comfortable for me, or avenge me, or defend me, or whatever. And God's like, no, you need to stay here so that I get the glory. And Maggie didn't get any glory there. Maggie got a lot of self-sacrifice. Maggie got a lot of revelation, trials, and things like that. And it's funny because it was so hard. I don't know how I got through it. So I laughed because it was terrible. So this prison, I'm a little confused about that part. So I've sent out some requests for some help. He was sent to the king's prison. And so there's some questions about whether Potiphar was in charge of that place or not. Because they never mention his name again. But all of a sudden, Joseph has all this power. So if Potiphar would have known, think about this. If Potiphar was still in charge all those years, all that character, I'm assuming that even in his wrath, he couldn't step away from Joseph's character. If Joseph is now placed in prison, Potiphar would have known that he would never be able to go back, but he could give him something to help him in his new path. It's not fair. Joseph didn't do anything wrong. He shouldn't be in this position at all. You could fight the principle of the whole thing and the unfairness, but it doesn't change the situation. There's this poem that I read to my students, and I used to hate poetry, but this is so beautiful. There's this part that says, "Rise up and cast off thy hindering shrouds." So hinder means to prevent from doing, acting, or an obstacle, impediment, or to hold back. So shroud is something that is wrapped around a dead person. Okay, so James Weldon Johnson wrote this poem, and he was fighting for change and continued to inspire African Americans in the midst of racial segregation. He was one of the people that helped to start the NAACP. And he encouraged people to recognize that their path is hard in this poem, but don't go feeling sorry for yourself again. He recognizes that life can get kind of hard. He says instead, when he says, "Rise up and cast off thy hindering shrouds," he says, stand up and push off whatever's holding you back. And then I started thinking about the story of Joseph and my own life and my own path. Is it your thoughts, your internal fight because you have been wronged? Is that what's holding you back? You cannot and will not accept this new path you're going down. Why? Is it because that means you accept defeat, that you've lost this battle, and that you agree with what happened? It certainly does not mean that you agree. However, when you think about what Joseph did, he didn't do anything wrong. He was loyal and faithful. He refused the advances of Potiphar's wife, and he was thrown into prison. He could have once again thrown a pity party, a woe is me party for himself, and sat down and did nothing until things were righted. And I don't know about you, but when something really wrong happens and people hurt me down to the core, the first thing I do is I sit down and kind of throw a little temper tantrum. I'm not moving until this is better. And I go to my daddy, my Jesus, and I cry and I wail and I wait for him to fix it for me. And sometimes he doesn't. And so I go back the next day and I cry and I wail and I beg my daddy to fix it. And he doesn't. And I go back day after day. I'm like, haven't you heard me? I am wronged here. This is not right, and you need to fix it. Can't you see what they did to me? Daddy, what is going on? And I plead and I beg and I cry, and he doesn't fix it. So what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do when God doesn't fix it? When he doesn't fix what's wrong? I start waiting for someone to come and save me. Someone to pick up my fight for me. But he doesn't do that. I keep waiting and waiting for a Savior to come in and save me and take me out of this situation. And I'm sure that Joseph did the same thing. But here's what Joseph did. He did the same thing that he did in Potiphar's house. He wasn't supposed to be a slave. He didn't do anything wrong. And he could try to defend himself all the day long. and wait for God to save him, or he could pick up himself and just do the best that he can do, even in an unfair situation. His character, his actions, his behavior didn't change just because of the situation. He remained committed to following God regardless of what was going on. When God doesn't fix my situation, what am I supposed to do that day while I'm waiting for him to fix it? While I'm waiting for him to tell those people that they're wrong and that they hurt my feelings and that they need to apologize? What am I going to do? Well, what does he tell me to do? To do everything to the glory of God, right? And so, what does that mean? Even if I don't feel like it, even when I don't want to, I do whatever I do, like God is my master, my boss, and I have to give him glory. So whether that's doing a load of laundry, whether that's working with students, whether that's working with my children when they're being just themselves, how do I respond to those situations? God doesn't give us a get out of jail free card because, oh, you don't have to do that because you had a really bad day, or that person hurt your feelings, so you don't really have to love this person anymore. And, you know, this like reprieve from all the things he expects us to do. I saw a bumper sticker once that said, "That love thy neighbor thing, yeah, I meant that, God." You don't get exceptions to the rule, and neither did Joseph. And I think that's why Joseph is so powerful. He remained committed to following God regardless. He wasn't given any encouragement or recognition, at least no recorded ones, that tell him to keep going, to keep his chin up. He probably felt like he was in a dark and lonely place, even with others around. Did they know he wasn't supposed to be there? Didn't they recognize that he was innocent and that this was wrong? Where were the people fighting for him? Sometimes nobody fights for you. Sometimes it's you and God on the other side. But we don't see him. We don't see his hand. It's just us. But he sees us. And we don't know what he is doing. So I'm wondering if during this time when he was fighting, he was thinking, the other prisoners, sure, they did something to belong here, but I didn't do anything. I'm sure he felt that he didn't deserve any of the things happening. However, that's not the path that he followed. In everything he did, he gave God glory. In everything he said, he worshiped God. When we have nothing left, what do we give? We give ourselves. Joseph's entire nation would be giving themselves soon. In this story, they would first give everything they could. Then they'd give the things they wanted to keep. Then, with nothing left, they'd offer themselves. I don't know which part you're at, but I have said many times, there's nothing left to give. I've already given everything. I've had everything taken from me. And you know what's left? Me.